Of Shabbos. Today is Ches Kislev. It's the 8th day of Kislev, which means that tomorrow is Tes Kislev, Shabbos. And we don't learn Shabbos. Tomorrow Shabbos is Tes Kislev. Tes Kislev is the birthday and the Histalkus, the Hilula, that means the Yartzeit of the Mitteler Rebbe. Of all the Rabbeim, beginning with the Baal Shem Tov, none of them passed away on their birthday bepashtus, except for the Mitteler Rebbe. Right? The Gemara says about Moshe Rabbeinu, Ben Meya ve'esim shana nechi hayoyim. Says the Gemara that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalim Yimeim V'Sheseim Shal Tzadikim Mechedesh Shal Chedesh Shal Mayim Al Yim. Hashem arranges that the lives of the tzaddikim should be whole, Mechedesh Shal Chedesh, from month to month, or Mayim Al Yim, from day to day. They live exactly the same number of years, the complete number of years. And of course, you know the lumdus, that if that would be the case, a tzaddik should not pass away on his birthday. He should pass away on the day before his birthday. And there's many answers to the question. And one of the answers to the question is that the day that a person passes away is not a part of his life. In other words, you have a life, and in the case of the Mitteler Rebbe, he lived 54 years, Neid Shana, Nun Dalet Shana, exactly. And the last day, the day that a person passes away, is not considered a day of a person's life. And the Chassidus of this Bekitzer of Beklalos is, the Zohar says, Kol Yoyme V'Yoyme Avad Avidete. We had it in Pashas Chayisarev, Avram Zokim Baba Yomim. Which means to say that in our lives, in addition to the fact that we give God many deeds, we give Hashem the time itself. And there's a concept of Kol Yoyme V'Yoyme Avad Avidete. Each day has its own function, its own job, its own definition. For some people, you can have a day where you're sort of lost. It's like spilling over from the day before, it's preparing for the day after. The day itself does not have its own identity. Al Pitera, Kol Yoyme V'Yoyme Avad Avidete. Each day must have its own separate concept of service to the Rebbe. Otherwise, as the Zohar says, the Lashon Chasa Yoyme Chada, Chasa Lavush Chada. If one is missing a day, then quote, they're missing what's called in Kabbalah and Chassidus a lavush, a garment. So in Torah, there's a concept of each day having its own avodah. And of course, the idea that each day has its own avodah is it's individual, it's specific, it's special. Sunday is Sunday, and you have the avodah of only Sunday. Monday is Monday, the avodah of only Monday, and so forth. Now, to elaborate a little bit, when you have, let's say, for example, Shabbos and Yom Tov, Shabbos and Yom Tov are special days. The meaning of Shabbos and Yom Tov being special doesn't only mean that you do special things. It means you do the regular things you would do on a regular day, and in addition to that, you have a musaf, you have a second dimension. And on Yom Kippur, you have a day with 3 dimensions. It's a regular day, like any day of the year. It's a Yom Tov, like any other Yom Tov of the year. And it's Achaz Bashana. It's unique. It's Achaz Bashana. It's the only day in the year which is in the category of Yom Kippur. The only people who manage to keep track of all these things and do all these things is the Rabbeim. I've told this to you many times, that the Rabbeim made a point on Yom Kippur to have regular learning like an ordinary day. And it wasn't only to underscore, but it also was the idea that every day has its responsibilities, and you have to deliver those responsibilities. The fact that you have additional responsibilities doesn't take away the basic responsibilities, it just adds to them. And this is the idea of Kol Yoyme V'Yoyme Avad Avidete. Every day of your life you serve Hashem. The day that a person passes away, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ein Shilton B'Yom HaMavis. It's based on a pasuk. The day a person passes away, the person doesn't have any control. Because that day is not a day of avodah. It's not a day to serve Hashem. In other words, it's not considered an individual day. We have a specific task. But rather that day would be the equivalent of a Shabbos for a lifetime. Just like we all understand the concept of Shabbos, we've talked about it many times, that on Shabbos everything rises up, and after Shabbos things come back down. But on the day that a person passes away, a whole life is risen up, is raised, goes up to a higher madrega. And therefore the function of the day that a person passes away is not specific. There's no specialized, distinct, individual task that is special for that day, but rather that's a day of aliyah, of culmination. So in fact, if a person passes away on his birthday, their lives on a practical level ended one day earlier, on Vav, like when we get to Moshe Rabbeinu, on Vav Adar. So the same is true by the Mitteler Rebbe. Tomorrow is the Mitteler Rebbe's birthday, Tes Kislev, and tomorrow is also the Histalkas Hilula, the day that the Mitteler Rebbe passed away. Like I said before, this is the only one of the Chabad Rabbeim who Begoloi had this Indian that you saw b'chush, the idea that Hashem makes Tzadikim's lives perfect and whole. There's another thing about the Mitteler Rebbe, and that is, as you know, the Mitteler Rebbe was arrested. And there used to be some doubt as to what year the arrest took place. But we now know, at least that's the way it seems in Das Tachten, that the Mitteler Rebbe was not arrested 1 year before he passed away, but 2 years before he passed away. The Rebbe writes, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, we're not sure about the year. The Mitteler Rebbe passed away in Tov Kuf Peches. Tov Kuf Peches would be the end of 1827. And he was arrested and released from prison in the fall and winter of 1825, Tov Kuf Peivav, 5,586, and he passed away in 5,588. But the Mitteler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula never became a full Yom Tov. It never became what the Alter Rebbe's Chag HaGeula was, and the reason is because there was really not a Geula Shleima. Although he was let go, the reasons for which he was arrested and the pressures and the invasion of his space that had taken place in framework, in the context of his arrest and investigation and all the other things, never ended, it never passed. The Mitteler Rebbe's Meiser ended with the Histalkus. There's a vort that the Mitteler Rebbe himself said once, that the Gemara says, Chazal tell us, that Avraham Avinu was given a choice about his descendants. Avraham Avinu was given a choice. The choices were Misa or Golus. Would he prefer that his children go into Golus or that they suffer, that they die? And the Avraham Avinu chose Golus, exile. So the Mitteler Rebbe said, the Tate mein hat genommen Golus, is upon him as Families geblieben der zweiter Berede. It's Mitteler Rebbe said, my father chose exile, so evidently for me was left the other choice, which was the union of Histalkus. So the Mitteler Rebbe was arrested and released from prison, but the release was only upon him, it was peripheral, it was chitoniistic. The negative invasion of his very personal space by the government of Russia, which surrounded his arrest, never subsided till he passed away, and maybe even after he passed away it continued. And therefore by Hasidim, Yud Kislev never became that full-blown Yom Tov the Tes Kislev was. And of course one of the more interesting details that this year is very precise is as follows, that when the Mitteler was arrested, he was arrested right after Sukkot. And he was treated with much more respect than was the Alter Rebbe, because they realized now the power of the Rabbeim. When they arrested the Alter Rebbe, they took him like a common prisoner. But when they realized how much influence he has over the Jewish people, they began to treat him with kid gloves. But the kid gloves were just a mask. Beneath those kid gloves was intimidation and fear. But as it was, in the case of the Mitteler Rebbe, when he was arrested, he wasn't taken to the capital of Russia, Petersburg. He was taken to the capital of the state in which Lubavitch was, which is a city called Vitebsk. And he was invited. He was not taken under guard. He was invited to come. He was accompanied by guards, but he was not taken under guard. And every city he came to, Chassidim came together, and there was Farbrengens, and there was Tischen, and there was Chassidus, and there was Studim de Kazachen, all the way till Vitebsk. And at a certain point the government said, what's going on? This man is a prisoner, and look what he's doing. He's acting like as if nothing in the world ever happened to him. And the Rebbe finally arrived in Vitebsk, it says, the beginning of Cheshvan, and he stayed there till Tes Kislev when he was allowed to go. But the story was that Tes Kislev, Tov Kuf Peivav, was Shabbos. Tes Kislev was Shabbos. And they came in to tell, this is where the Rebbe tells the story in the Farbrengens. They came in to tell the Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, that he's free to go. And they found, it was Shalashud this time, that the Rebbe was in the middle of saying Hasidus, and they did not want to disturb. The Rebbe was saying a Maimed. And we know what Maimed he was saying. He was saying a Maimed that begins with the Pasuk in Siddur. The Maimed is, some say that we have that Maimed that's actually published. The Rebbe over the years said many versions of the Maimed Ata Echad, but we have a printed Maimed for the Mitteler Rebbe Ata Echad. We're not sure if that was the Maimed he said while in jail or not, but such a Maimed does exist in any event. And as he was saying Chasidus, they came to tell him that he's free. But they didn't want to interrupt him, so they let him finish. And as a result, he was not informed of his freedom till Motzei Shabbos, till Yud Kislev. So the Chag HaGeula became Yud Kislev. Tomorrow, Sunday, we do not say Tachnun. Sunday we don't say Tachnun because Sunday is a Yom Tov of Chag HaGeula, the Mitteler Rebbe. And I was thinking this morning as I'm walking up Kingston Avenue that, Yud Kislev, we have 2 days of Yom Tov. Although the Alter Rebbe, when he went out of jail, ended up by this Misnagid's house, Ebnot Notkin, who verbally abused him terribly. We have 2 days Yom Tov. By the Friedrich Rebbe, we have 2 days Yom Tov, because on Yud Beis Tammuz he was told unofficially that he's free to go, and on Yud Gimel Tammuz he was told officially that he's free to go. So the question becomes, how come we don't celebrate Tes Kislev? We should not say Tachnun and Tes Kislev, by the virtue of the fact that Tes Kislev was the day they wanted to tell the Rebbe he's free. The only reason they did not tell him he was actually free is because they didn't want to interrupt him in the middle of saying Chassidus. There could be no greater Geula than a Rebbe who's sitting in jail, who's saying Chassidus, and his guards don't want to interrupt him because he's in the middle of saying Teres Hashem, Teres Chassidus, Teres Dir Elokim Chaim. I think, and this is just an I think, and believe me, it's not very, very useful, that the reason we're not kever to not say Tachnun Tes Kislev is because it's his yahrzeit. And by us, the custom is that a yahrzeit you dafke say Tachnun. In other words, if it had not been the Mitteler Rebbe's yahrzeit, maybe this story would have led us eventually to make Tes Kislev also into a double Yom Tov, a 2-day Yom Tov. Tes Kislev, he was supposed to be told he was free. They couldn't tell him he was free. Why? Because he was saying Chassidus, and he wasn't told that he was free to go till the following day, Yud Kislev, and Yud Kislev became the Yom Tov. And like I said, because he passed away, and I mentioned the story many times, the Rebbe once asked the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe said by Fabring, and I once asked the Rebbe the Shver, how we say Tachnun on a yahrzeit. Polish Chassidim, other Chassidic groups don't say any Tachnun on yahrzeit because it's a Yom Tov. So the Friedrich Rebbe said, these are the words. Wenn then is da bessere Zeit sagen Tachnun. Is there then any time better than on a yahrzeit to say Tachnun? Because it's the time of his Eidus. So I think maybe that this is the reason. But this you'll have to take or leave. Be that as it may, whatever the case is, whatever the story is, tomorrow was the birthday and the Estalkas Hilul of the Mitteler Rebbe, and Sunday is the Chag HaGeula of the Mitteler Rebbe. And the Rebbe in his Maimorim and his Sichis connects it to the Pashas HaShavua. Right? The Rebbe connects Yud Kislev to the Pashas HaShavua. And it's not very difficult to find a connection between Pashas HaShavua and the Mitteler Rebbe's arrest. What's Pashas HaShavua about? Vayetze Yankiv. The Pashas Yankov Avinu going away from Eretz Yisrael. And he's going into exile, Bepashtas. As the Mitteler Rebbe went into exile. And by the way, the same is true also Benegeh to Tes Kislev. Tes Kislev either has to do with Vayishlach or Vayeshev, and both of those parshas have to do with Golus. So in the Rebbe Siches, he always explains the connection between the Pashas HaShavua and the Meiser and the Geula, the rest and liberation of the Mitteler Rebbe. And of course, the Rebbe underscores not the Golus itself, but the Geula. That Yankov Avinu says, "V'shafti b'sholem el beis avi." V'shafti b'sholem, I'm going to turn in peace to my father's home. So the Rebbe says that the V'shafti b'sholem of Yankov Avinu is the same as the Pada b'sholem of the Alter Rebbe and the Pada b'sholem of the Mitteler Rebbe, right? You all know that the Mitteler Rebbe used to say Tillim when he was in jail. And since it was Yud Kislev, so he was saying the Yom HaAsiri, Kapitel Nun Hey, and therefore he said Pada b'sholem. But the Pashas HaShavua has the equivalent of that Pada b'sholem. V'shafti b'sholem al-beis avi, I will return in peace to my father's home. V'hayad Hashem lila lakim, the Eibush is going to be my God. This is the pasuk in the Pashas HaShavua. So the Rebbe explains that V'shafti b'sholem doesn't mean I will return in peace, but V'shafti b'sholem means I will return with peace. And he explains that peace goes on Torah, because Torah doesn't fight with the world, it enlightens it. And within Torah itself, peace goes on Pnimiyas HaTorah, on Chassidus, that shines light, it doesn't get dirty, it doesn't deal with the Shmutz of Elam Hazah. And the peace goes specifically on the Chassidus of the Mitteler Rebbe, because the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus you can understand. The Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus is not a matter of faith and holiness, it's an inyan from Avona Vasaga, it's brought down to a level a human mind can grasp a lakus. It's the epitome of peace. So V'shafti b'sholem means that the schus of the Mitteler Rebbe's Geula has to do with the Chassidus that he was teaching. In other words, he was arrested and put in jail. The government of Russia took him in and said that they were arresting him because of financial improprieties. They wanted to look over his books. They wanted to control how he spends money, how he collects money, how he distributes it. Which was very, very rude. Very, very, very rude. Very chutzpahdik. Because they had a status of as Rachim, the Chabad, they're saying. They were considered honorary citizens. So the Rebbe says to the Friedrich Rebbe, it was true Thank you. Thank you very much. The Rabbeim were Racham Nechbadim, they say him, but they were always afraid. They never felt safe. In other words, this honor was a pretense, it was a shtick. They gave him this honor of Imizakt so that people should think that they're respected citizens. But the fact was that the Rabbeim curtailed. There were many things that Rabbeim would have liked to do that they did not do because they were afraid of the ill effects of the government. And there's many, many things that we know that the Tzemach Tzedek stopped. There were many customs, Hasidic customs, that the Mitteler Rebbe established as part of the Chabad mainstream, which the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, stopped because of a Nayim Bishin, because of inappropriate eyes that were looking to find things to make libels out of them. The Chassidus was quiet. Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus was shturmdik. I don't mean the way he said my modim. I mean the whole culture was very powerful and very beautiful and very, very rich and very demonstrative in a way. And the Tzemach Tzedek had to stop these things because the Mitteler Rebbe's arrest, it really, really ended, like I said to you earlier, because of the histalkus of the Rebbe, of the Mitteler Rebbe. So, but the previous was, of course, that his arrest was because he was revealing too much Chassidus. And V'shavti b'shalom ha'beis means that he went out of jail, he was freed, because the decree, the Gezerah L'Mayla, which was established against Chassidus, was lifted. It was now free to reveal Chassidus, even in the Madrege that the Mitteler Rebbe was revealing Chassidus. So this is the Samizakti, the Parshas HaYoyim, the story of the day B'Kitzur. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe was born about 13 years and a few months after the Alter Rebbe and his Rebbetzin, Harabonos HaTzidkonos Sterna, had gotten married. Okay? Pardon me? He was not a B'chor, no, he had older sisters. Freide and Tevereleah. The Alter Rebbe was desperate for a boy. And he wasn't having a boy. He had one girl, then he had a second girl. And he repeatedly came to his Rebbe, to the Maggid, and asked him for a ben Zacha, for a male son, and the Maggid would not respond. Days, mamish days, individual days, before the histalkus of the Mitteler Rebbe, Mr. Maggid, suddenly the Mr. Maggid offers him a ben Zacha, a bracha, without him asking even, and he tells him, Zolst of mir nicht vergessen, don't forget about me. The Mitteler Rebbe was born 10 days before the first yard site. The Mr. Maggid passed away Tes Kislev. The Mitteler was born Tes Kislev. So the Levaya was Tes Ayin Kislev, the 16th of Kislev. So the Alter Rebbe obviously was there when his wife gave birth to their first son. 8 days later was the bris, and he named him Doiv Ber, after the Mizitcher Maggid. The Alter Rebbe would say later in his life, the Alter Rebbe told his very dear friend and Mechutin, the Heilige Rabbi Badichev, he said, when he was born, I thought to name him Hamnuna, which means secret. Because the neshama of the Mitteler Rebbe came from Alma Deskasi, Nuna Yamada Azla Biabesha, the fish from the sea that walk on the land. His neshama came from a world of Pnimius HaTeira, which is why by the Mitteler Rebbe, Chassidus was Pashat life itself. So he told the B'ditch, I wanted to name him Hamnuna, which means secret. Aber der Rebbe ist gestanden neben mir und geheißen, geb mein Namen nach ihm. But by the bris, the Rebbe stood next to me, that means the Maggid, and said, name him after me. So he became David, like the Maggid had instructed. That's the Mitteler Rebbe. As a child yet, the Mitteler, first of all, the Mitteler Rebbe was Butzen Kitvi Yediyah. You saw right away this was not a normal child at all. And he was not a healthy child. He suffered a lot. He had respiratory problems his whole life. With the lungen. And in a very early age, you saw his netiyah to ruchnius. From a very, very early age, you saw that this was a person whose life was defined by spirituality, by ruchnius, by holiness. He took to chassidus like a fish to water. Now I'm sure when he was a little boy, his father taught him chumash and mishnah and gemara like the halachas are. And the Mitteler Rebbe had, the Fiedeke we used to say about the Mitteler Rebbe, Zayin Moichin, wer kennt das? We have no idea how bright, how intelligent the Mitteler Rebbe was. We can't even begin to imagine the level of intellect of the Mitteler Rebbe. And he swallowed up Nigla like it was nothing, like it wasn't even there. You know, the Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe, so the Chassidim asked him, how come he doesn't say as much Chassidus as his father-in-law? So he says, my father-in-law walks from one side of the Beis Medrash to the other side of the Beis Medrash, and he learns through a half a shas. Then he walks back, he thinks through the other half a shas. I still need to learn Nigla, so the Tzemach Tzedek said. But the Mitteler Rebbe was an extraordinary mind, and a very, very spiritual and holy person. A getlecher man. He was a godly man. And everything he experienced on a very, very edele, spiritual levels. The Alter Rebbe is Ben Abchad, the Alter Rebbe's oldest son. And he obsessed over Chassidus. He poshet, he lived from Chassidus like some people live from chocolate, yeah? No. Huh? No, I wasn't, it's an old joke, it's a Shkenaya joke. Can't be insulted by an old joke. Whatever it is, by Taifas Gashmim, he poshet lived from Chassidus. And his obsession with Chassidus was mamish incredible. Ad kedei kach, it was to such an extent that it's a very interesting letter. I think it's very interesting. There's a book called the Geras Shpirin, I think that's what it's called. I have it in the house. Or Michtevei Teira, I think it's called Geras Shpirin. It's letters from the Mitteler HaDakir and Avram Kalisker. These two men were the big Hasidic Rebbes, the big tzaddikim, who had traveled to Eretz Yisrael and established the Yishuv of Hasidim in Israel. Right? They started out in Tverje, in the north of Eretz Yisrael, and then they moved, if I'm not mistaken. But they started out in Tverje, in Golol Elyon, in Golol. And these two, the leaders of the Chavraya, the Kvutza. The Mendel Vitebsker, the Alter Rebbe considered him his Rebbe. Rabbi Kalisker, the Alter Rebbe considered him his friend. When the Mendel Vitebsker passed away, the Rabbi Kalisker became the head of the Kila, the Yishuv of Etzrol Chasidim, and he very, very severely criticized the Alter Rebbe. And every year he would write a letter condemning the Alter Rebbe's derech of Chabad and encouraging Hasidim to stay away from him and not to give him money and to have nothing to do with him, because he was violating the mainstream, he was violating the established understanding of what Hasidus is. And there's a whole arichas asipah. The Alter Rebbe at first did not respond. Eventually the Alter Rebbe had no choice, but he finally responded with a letter which is printed. But one of the things that's interesting in those letters is he writes to the Alter Rebbe and says, listen Rebbe, I understand you've created this new model for Hasidus, and you are saturating your Hasidim with this new philosophy, with this new approach. And in my view, you're doing them terrible damage. But at least have mercy on your young, gifted child, he tells him. The brief. Avram Kalisker could not have known the Mitteler Rebbe. Avram Kalisker left Europe, the Mitteler Rebbe was 3.5. He says, you have such a gifted child. And from what I hear, he sits a whole day and a whole night and learns Chassidus. And you're ruining him. You're making him imbalanced. He should be a normal person. At least save your abuse to your chassidim, but leave your son alone as Leiner Shtickl bench. Of course, the Alter Rebbe was taking very good care of the Mitteler Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe understood that this is the bechin of the Mitteler Rebbe. So his life was poshet chassidus bepashtus. And of course, there's the famous stories. One of the stories is that one time the Alter Rebbe said a maimer, and the Mitteler Rebbe did not understand it. So he went into the Alter Rebbe and asked the Alter Rebbe to say a bia to explain it. This was normal. That the Alter Rebbe said a Chassidus, and the Chassidim would not understand, he would say a bia, a clarification. And we have in Teire Ein, and Chutei Teire, many Mamorim with Rebbe Yurim. And the Alter Rebbe did not answer him. He asked for a clarification, the Alter Rebbe did not answer him. So he got physically ill, became physically sick, and he was in bed with fever. He was sick. So the Rebbe instead, the Rebbe instead, the Alter Rebbe's wife, the Mitteler Rebbe's mother, came into her husband and says, "Du bist doch ein Achser," he says. She says to him, "You're a cruel man. Du hast, und du willst nicht geben, und guck, was von ihm ist geworden. You refuse to give, and look what you made of him. He's sick." So Alter Rebbe laughed and he said, "Zog Berel said zayin der Bier. Soll sich nicht sagen. Tell Berel he could relax. I'm going to say the Bier. I'll explain it." So he became better. Finished. That was the Mitteler Rebbe. He had pushed it. Chelas Av. He loved Chassidus. He obsessed over Chassidus. And stories like these, there are many. One of the more powerful stories, and maybe some would say uncomfortable stories, is that when the Mitteler Rebbe had to get married, his father asked him which shidduch he wishes. There were several possibilities. There were several proposals. And the Alter Rebbe asked his son, the Mitteler Rebbe, which shidduch would you like? So he answered, whichever one is going to marry me the soonest. Because I know that when I got married, my father's going to say more chassidus, and I want to hear the chassidus. In dem is gelegn. This was his life. Gelegn in chassidus. Mamish. His whole life was chassidus. The Alter Rebbe had in his house a sefer, a book that it was tied closed. Somehow it was closed, And on the cover was written these words, Kizeres Nachash La'akere, Bozeo Baba. Which means, the Rebbe writes, the Alter Rebbe makes a ban, a decree of excommunication to anybody who's going to read this sefer in this world or in the next world. The Mitteler Rebbe saw such sharp words, Kizeres Nachash La'akere, Bozeo Baba. He didn't read the sefer. Then there was a fire, and the sefer got burnt. The Alter Rebbe felt terrible. So he comes to his son, the Mitteler Rebbe, and he asks him, did you read the sefer? He says, did I read the sefer? It says on the sefer, what do you think? I read it. So Alter Rebbe was very disappointed. And he said to him, Vu is the Mesiris Nefesh for Chassidus. He's supposed to be Mesiris Nefesh for Chassidus. And the Mesiris Nefesh for Chassidus, even though the Gezeres Nachash, you have an opportunity to learn Chassidus, you have Mesiris Nefesh and you learn Chassidus. This was the Mitteler Rebbe. Another interesting, so to speak, it's not an aspect, but it's a piece of history is, and I'll give you a Hagdama, I'll give my Hagdama. The Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe stood in perpetual disagreement and a big argument. The Alter Rebbe used to say to the Mitteler Rebbe, I am greater than you. And the Mitteler Rebbe used to say to the Alter Rebbe, I am greater than you. The Alter Rebbe would say to the Mitteler Rebbe, I am greater than you because I have a son, a Rebbe, which means I produced a Rebbe. And the Mitteler Rebbe used to say to the Alter Rebbe, I am greater than you because I have a father, a Rebbe. In other words, the Mitteler Rebbe knew that his son was not going to be the next Rebbe. This was the argument. This was the argument. And the Alter Rebbe gave the Mitteler Rebbe permission to say Chassidus, even to say Chassidus with biur. I'll explain what this means. The Alter Rebbe had a strict rule, a very strict rule, a rule that was unbreakable. And when somebody violated that rule, there were very, very severe consequences. And the rule was that when you chazer Chassidus, you have to say it exactly word for word. You have to give back a Maimed Alter Rebbe as the Alter Rebbe gave it verbatim. No modification, no changes, no adaptation, and no interpretation. There was a chassid who felt qualified to do that. His name was Aaron Alevi Horowitz from Strashele, the Bar Strashele Rebbe. And he used to also explain the Maimed Alter Rebbe, and he also was not careful in Lashon Harav and using Alter Rebbe's words. And Alter Rebbe punished him twice. Each time he punished him was for 3 years. And the punishment was that he could not come to Liyadi. For a person like this not to see the Rebbe for 3 years, twice, was an extraordinary painful punishment. And then there was a falling up between him and the Mitteler Rebbe, and he left. He became his own Metzias with his own Rebbe and so forth. Rabbi Aaron Alevi Strashla had a taina to the Alter Rebbe. The taina that he had to the Alter Rebbe is Lama Garua Nechem Mimenu. Your son, the Mitteler Rebbe, you allow him to say Chassidus. You allow him to elaborate, like some Chassidus used to say, "The Shvef like machen von Avort Akvort." My grandfather said one word. My father makes it a whole Welt. His elaboration was also gewöhnlich. And he's also asking new questions and writing new sugyas and Chassidus. And when the Mitteler Rebbe would chazer Chassidus, he wouldn't just say the words of the Alter Rebbe. He would initially say the words of the Alter Rebbe with his own explanation, with his own clarification, with his own biur. So the Ba'anas Strashele says, how come it's good for him, it's not good for me? He could say, the Alter Rebbe said a maimer for 10 minutes, and the Mitteler Rebbe could say a maimer for 2 hours. Say maimer. And you could barely find Lashon Harav, the Alter Rebbe's maimerim, and but Ba'anas Strashele, he would punish him for it. And of course the answer is, because the Mitteler Rebbe was not the same as the Ba'anas Strashele. The Mitteler Rebbe was like younger than him. And the Ba'anas Strashele was like a very, very great. But the Mitteler Rebbe was a Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe was very, very trusting of the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus, and it wasn't a Emunah Pshuta. It was based on the information that he delivered. He saw the Maimarim, he saw the efforts, he trusted the Mitteler Rebbe implicitly, and he gave him permission to say Maimarim with beer and even to publish him, to be mefarsim that way. Mitteler Rebbe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe adds that when you look at the Maimarim of the Mitteler Rebbe, and of course this means as opposed to the Maimarim of Ba'anas Strashele, although there's such ariches, although the Mitteler Rebbe is so elaborate, these are the words: Ken men darten seilen the Asius Haravi pedal. You can count the words of the Alter Rebbe like diamonds, like pearls. The Mitteler Rebbe, as much as he expands on the Maimed, the Alter Rebbe was careful to preserve the Lashon Harav. Rabbi Aaron Strashel was not so careful, which is why the Alter Rebbe punished him. But by the Mitteler Rebbe, he would take a Maimed from the Alter Rebbe and expand it from one thought. He made huge pilpulim. I cannot say I'm an expert at the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus, because I'm not. I haven't learned enough of it. But from the little bit that I've read, not the printed Sfarim, the Ksav, in other words, not the Maimarim that he printed during his lifetime, the books that came out more recently, it almost sounds like the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimarim are like a mashpia. He says words in Alter Rebbe and he explains it. He says words in Alter Rebbe, it's so explained, and there's a lot of very, very, very odd mishalim and words that seem vestigial. It's hard to exactly read the Maimon of Mitteler Rebbe, but it sounds sort of like he's becoming like a mashpia who's explaining a Maimon to Chassidim. That's my read, but you have to take my word for it. Anyway, the story goes like this: that in the end of the Alter Rebbe's life, the Alter Rebbe was in a very, very good mood, perpetually in a good mood. And when Chassidim came to Liyadi to Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe sort of felt, Alter Rebbe sort of felt like he won all of his wars. He brought Chassidus into the world. It's here, it's permanent, it's not going away. So he was in a perpetual good mood. And during this Tkufa, he could say Chassidus 2, maybe 3-4 times a week, very often. We have the modern, they're printed, you could see it. And Chassidim had no limits. They can come to the Lubavitch, to the Yad as long as they wanted and stay as long as they wanted. All the restrictions about how frequently you can come and how long you could stay were before, and those were abolished. It was an open house. Anybody wanted could come. So if you came to the Alter Rebbe with a Shaila, Gashmis, Parnasa, health, wealth, and so forth, he helped you. If you came to the Alter Rebbe with a Shaila Ruchnis, the Alter Rebbe used to say, Bazeh HaLoshon, Geh zu mein Rebbe, go to my Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe said Sof Yomov, Geh zu mein Rebbe, he meant his son, the Mitteler Rebbe. So you came into the Mitteler Rebbe and you told the Mitteler Rebbe your grievances, and the Mitteler Rebbe would look at you and say, what are you doing here? We have a Rebbe. And I'm not the Rebbe, so they would say to the Mitteler Rebbe, the Tata Geschikt, the Rebbe sent to you. Oh, the Tata Geschikt. My father sent you to me. It's another story. He put on his Shtraimul, when it's like the end for him. As he wasn't the Seder. Sof Yomov. Because Alter Rebbe is Nistala geworden. Alter Rebbe passed away. The Mitteler Rebbe was not around. Because the war with the French was ending. And of course the Rabbeim knew that they had no place to live. They destroyed their homes. The Alter Rebbe burned his house down in the Yad Yikiyadua. He had no place to go back to. So the Mitteler Rebbe traveled from country to country to raise money. I'm sorry, erase that. Yeah, the Mitteler Rebbe was traveling to the city of Kremenchuk to buy homes for the Alter Rebbe to live with his family in anticipation of the end of the war. Alter Rebbe was living in Piena at the time, in the village of Piena, and they anticipated that the war was going to end and they would have to settle down. Kremenchuk, I think it's called Malarussia as opposed to Belarussia, small Russia as opposed to white Russia. I'm not sure what the difference is, but that's what it's called. So he traveled to Kremenchuk to purchase homes, places for Alter Rebbe to live. Alter Rebbe was Nistalik Motzei Shabbos Kedesh, Pashas Shmois Chavdal Tevis. And the Mitteler Rebbe was not around. He missed the Alter Rebbe's Lavaya completely. And when he returned, and he was told that there was Ian from Mistalkus, he chalished. So they revived him. So he chalished. And they revived him, and he chalished for 24 hours in a row. Now I think fainting and fainting again for 24 hours is a pretty dangerous endeavor. It's exhausting to the body to keep on fainting. And so they tried tricks. They tried to lie to him. He's still alive. He's just very ill. So he started to feel better. And then they told him the truth. The Vidige chalished. And they were pashut afraid for his life. So what did they do? They took a kestel of chassidus, a big box of chassidus, and they placed it right next to him. All the ksavim from the Alter Rebbe. So the first thing the Mitteler Rebbe would see when he opened up his eyes would be the Maimorim. So when he opened up his eyes and he saw the Maimorim, had the Mitteler Rebbe Azageton says, "Da mitvos zu leben." We have with what to live, or to say it more accurately, why to live. And he stopped fainting. And the Rebbe became a Rebbe. Amongst the greatest Hasidim whom the Mitteler Rebbe inherited from his father was a Ga'an HaGa'onim, a giant of giants by the name of Reb Zalman Zezmir. Reb Zalman Zezmir came to the Alter Rebbe because of a dream. Reb Zalman Zezmir had a Rebbe. And when this Rebbe passed away, he came to him in a dream and he told him, when I was a young man, I met in Shklov, I think, the Gaon, the Yajner Magid, and I'm asking you should go to him. So he became one of the greatest Chassidim with Alter Rebbe. He was a Chacham Betzim Kechach Masay. I don't know what that means, but it's certainly special. Alter Rebbe was Nistalik, et Zalman Zezmir gesagt, Chassidus Chabad hat sich ausgelost. Mehr kein Chassidus wird nicht sein. Chassidus Chabad has expired. There will be no more Chassidus. In other words, what we have, and that's the end of it. So the Mitteler Rebbe said, was? Mitteler Rebbe heard, was? Es wird nicht sein, mehr kein Chassidus. Ich will sagen, dass jetzt mi abchem. I'm going to talk and talk till it's coming out of your nostrils. I'm going to talk so much, you're not going to know where to run and hide. And Kachave, Mitteler Rebbe first became a Rebbe. He started to say Chassidus on a Seder, regular schedule, with every Shabbos, or Shabbos Mevarchim. So that Tzemach Tzedek used to come to the Chassidus. Tzemach Tzedek was the Eidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. But after a few years, the Mitteler just took off. 3-4 times a Shabbos, 4 or 5 times a week, 4 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a workday. It became impossible to keep up. So when the Mitteler wanted to say Chasidus, he would send messengers that are going to say Maimorim, and the Chasidim would gather. But you never knew. It says in the Siches, there was one year Simchas Torah, the Mitteler said Chasidus, one Maimon after another, after another, after another. There was no Akafas. There was no time for anything. The next day after Simchas Torah, the Chasidim got together and they put the Akafas and they have a Nusach Yom Tov, so the Nusach of Yom Tov, and they had Sudas Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov itself, if Posher was not Bechdesh Yasu, Chasidus was non-stop by Mitteler Rebbe. Ona Shin Ona Bereg. And there's a Vot that goes, that one time one of the Chassidim said to Mitteler Rebbe, that you've revealed all of Chassidus. So Rebbe said, Das is alles gewesen was Arum Chassidus. This was all the introduction. It's the vet menet Chassidus. Now I'm going to begin to say Chassidus itself, by Mitteler Rebbe. And by the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim, Chassidus became so real that everything else became less real. The Mitteler Rebbe aufgegeben seine Chassidim. He raised up his Chassidim with such a madrege that hundreds and hundreds of young light breathed, ate, and slept Chassidus. They were poor, Sheba poor. They were so poor it's indescribable. And all they thought about was Teirus Chassidus. And then they gelept. This is what they ate. This is what they slept. The Frierdiker says in a Siche, it is alte Chassidische Wort, as the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim hat Mashiach and nicht gefällt. They didn't need Mashiach. How could you not need Mashiach? And the answer was because they had Mashiach in their Rebbe, they had Mashiach in their Hiskashrus, they had Mashiach in the Teirus Chassidus. And of course, the story of the Mitteler Rebbe's Histalkos is just as remarkable. At the Mitteler Rebbe traveled to Gaditch, which is the Mechazek of Nalten Rebbe, after the whole story with the arrest, and he came out and he said that Tat hat mir abgesagt from the Rabbanos. My father released me from the Rabbanos. So the Chassidim assumed that this means that there's going to be a trip to Eretz Yisrael. He was only 53 years old. Nobody thought for a moment Ayin for Nistalkus. And then he traveled and he got very ill and he got stuck in the city of Nezhin, and eventually he passed away in Nezhin. And the doctors told him that he's not allowed to speak. Mitteler had very, very bad lungs, but he could speak for 10 hours straight with his bad lungs. And now the doctors outlawed him to use his lungs, not to speak. So he became poshet comatose, mamash fachalisht, laying in a bed without a siman chayim. So one doctor tells another doctor, I'll show you a wonder. And he went over to the Mitteler Rebbe, and he whispered in his ears that the doctors reconvened, and they decided that it's actually good for him to say Chassidus. So he sat up immediately, and he asked for Big Day Shabbos, and he started to say Chassidus. And that whole week, the week before his Histalkos, he said Chassidus. The night of Tes Kislev, which was going to be his yard site, that was his birthday, he said Chassidus a whole night, 3 different times. And there's a riboy pratim in the Maisis. And finally, late in the night, the Mitteler Rebbe sat, and I would imagine he wasn't talking very loud, because the way it's described, they were literally breathing on top of him. They were like piled on top of him. Apparently, it was hard to hear him. And the Rebbe says, Ich will sagen, Chassidus, und egal sein Seidus, was that in Kemel nicht Nisgala geworden. They were never ever revealed before, which is exactly what the Shimon Bar Yochai said by his Histalkos. I'll reveal secrets that were never revealed before. And as he was preparing to say Chassidus, one of the Chasidim's hat fell down and distracted the Mitteler Rebbe. So he said, "There's a simin amadaf nicht megalazan. This is a sign I shouldn't reveal it." So he spoke a different maimer. And in the middle of the he kept on asking if it's morning yet, if the morning star came up, Allah Shachar. And exactly at the time of Alaysa Shachat, Mamash, when the morning came, he was in the middle of speaking, and he said, that with the Eibush you have a source of life, who gives life to all living things, and he stopped speaking. So people thought that he went into a trance, and they soon realized that just on Nishmasei B'Chaim, that the Mitteler Rebbe's Neshama left saying the word Chaim, which is a precise repetition of the Histalkos of Rabbi. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai also passed away when he said the word Chaim. And the Tzemach Tzedek writes that the kind of Histalkos that was by my Shver, by the Mitteler Rebbe, has not been Mimeis Rashbi. And one of the unique inyanim of the Mitteler Rebbe was that he printed his own Maimorim. None of the Rabbi printed their own Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe printed the Tanya, and that was it. Printing Chassidus did not start till the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia. But in Russia there was no such thing as publishing Chassidus. It was all b'ksav yad, manuscripts. The only Rebbe who printed his own Chassidus was the Mitteler Rebbe. He printed 10 Sfarim b'chayav, and the Tzemach Tzedek used to say, "Am aval geschnitten beim Schwer die Finger." If someone would cut the finger of my father-in-law, wird nicht gerunnen Blut, es wird gefließt Chassidus. Blood wouldn't flow, Chassidus would flow, because his physical life was from Chassidus mamish. So tomorrow is his Yom Haledet and his Yom Salkas Yelula. And Sunday is the Chag Yula, so Blinade will talk about the Chag Yula, the Mitteler Rebbe. Okay, a guten Shabbos, and a guten Yom Tiv. Und so, sein bei allem in Freilach auf den Heiten, wir schaffen die Beschalung bei Beisavi.